Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here, particularly on this bitterly cold night, and for fighting the elements in order to honor some remarkable people. I'm John Davies. I'm the president of the Baton Rouge Area Foundation. This event is actually my favorite event of the year, and we have quite a few. And I think our staff shares that same sense. One reason is that we celebrate something fundamental to humans and something that's universal, and that is that we're all storytellers. We tell stories around the dining room table about the day we had. We tell stories on Monday morning about our weekend. We tell stories about our grandchildren, in my case, children, our friends, our neighbors, and about the strangers we've met in our travels, near and far. Some of us are exceptionally gifted storytellers. Those who are watch in the world around them and listen carefully to the distinctive voices of those who are among them. What they see and hear coalesces into characters, inhabits worlds that are familiar enough to offer insights into our own world. There is beauty in their words, in their stories. As a child, Ernest Gaines listened to the stories told by his elders on the front porches of homes in Oscar. And then he wrote stories that shaped our understanding of ourselves in books such as A Lesson Before Dying, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, The Gathering of Old Men. Tonight we're in for a very special treat. Mr. Gaines will read from his new novella, The Tragedy of Brady Sims. Also tonight, along with Mr. Gaines, we will listen to the words of another great storyteller. Her name is Lady Hubbard. She is a winner of this year's Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. But before we honor her, I'd like to tell you a little of our own story. This is the 11th Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. When we created this award more than a decade ago, we had an important goal in mind. We wanted to support African American writers so that the legacy established by Mr. Gaines would carry on for a new generation. The first 10 winners have built on the legacy writing and teaching, and they have been recognized for their achievement here in America and around the world. Dino Magestu, for instance, won the MacArthur Genius Award. Victor Laval's 2017 novel, The Changeling, was chosen the best of the year by the New York Times. We know that great things await Lady Hubbard as well. Thank you, Mr. Gaines, for being with us tonight. And thank you, Diane, his wonderful wife, who's off stage, but will join him shortly, for all you do to help us with the Gaines Award every year. I also thank people who helped put this puzzle piece together for the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. Among them are my dear, dear friend, Mary Ann Sternberg, whom you will hear from shortly. She agreed to chair this committee from its inception, and it's her energy, devotion, and high cerebral caliber that made this the event that it's been. I also like to thank Lynn Mitchell, who has been critical in linking the Gaines Award winner with our area schools, and you'll hear more from her later. And I can't help but thank my colleague Lois Smith, who organized this event and has for the last several years. I must tell you that yesterday afternoon, meeting Lady, she broke her left wrist and will be in surgery tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. So the question you ask is she here tonight? And the answer is, of course. That is my colleague, Lois Smith. So thank you, Lois, for that. Picking a winner each year is a challenge that we entrust to a panel of independent literary judges, writers, professors, editors. Our judges this year are Tony Grooms, Edward P. Jones, Elizabeth Nunez, Francine Prose, Patricia Towers. Tony and Patricia are with us tonight. I can't see you, but would you please stand up and be recognized? Tony and Patricia, where are you? Upstairs. Thank you very much. We appreciate you. We are also delighted to acknowledge our underwriters for this year's award, and from this year forward, it's the McMains Foundation. We're most grateful to them, and the Baton Rouge Area Foundation's own Downtown Enhancement Fund. It is now my great pleasure to turn the ceremony over to my dear friend, Marianne Sternberg. Marianne?
Thank you. Thanks, Sean, and thanks to all of you who truly did show up against the odds this evening. You were very stalwart. We appreciate it, but I think you'll be glad you came. As John said, this year marks the 11th year of the award, and it was inspired, of course, by Ernest Gaines and its goal to recognize and encourage emerging or not well-known African-American fiction writers for a book that was published during the year. After careful deliberation, as you know, the judges chose Lady Hubbard's The Talented Ripkins. Congratulations again, lady. But though we're very glad that she's here and we're glad that this has all worked out, we are so sorry that the vagaries of our weather conspired to keep her from the area school visits that have become a wonderful component of the winner's itinerary each year. We really regret that she wasn't able to share her insights on writing, and that students missed being able to interact with a real writer. Who knows how many might have been inspired by her. I've gotten to visit with her, and it's certainly something that they missed out on. Before Lady receives the award, and reads from her book, we wouldn't let the opportunity go by, as John said, without asking Ernest Gaines to do the same, because this is the first time since we started the award in 2006 when Ernest has had a new book published, the new novella, The Tragedy of Brady Sims. It's a special milestone, we think, and it therefore seemed fitting to ask him to read an excerpt from his new work so that we could hear it in his voice. Mr. Gaines, please.
Thank you, Marianne. I'll read from chapter 1. It was over. We got up to leave. 2 deputies had this prisoner by the arms. I was sitting in back of the courtroom because I had been on another assignment and I had gotten there late. I was near the aisle when I heard someone call out loud and clear, "Boy!" I looked back over my shoulder and I saw that the 2 deputies had stopped with their prisoner and were facing old Brady Sims. Next came the loudest sound that I'd ever heard. I saw the prisoner fall back with blood splashing from his body, and both deputies let go of his arms at the same time. Brady Sims stood there in that old faded blue jumper with the smoke still rising from the gun in his hand. Then came the screaming and scrambling to get out of the place or get down on the floor. The members of the jury who didn't run out of that room got down behind their chairs. The judge went under his desk. The 2 deputies stood frozen with their hands near the guns, but not on their guns. Brady, facing them, his head as white as cotton is in September, stood as straight and tall as a picket in a fence. I watched him. I watched them all, afraid to run, afraid to get down on the floor. Keeping my eyes on the deputies, keeping his eyes on the deputies, old Brady backed his way down the aisle. The 2 deputies watched him, but did not move. The rest of the people lay quietly on the floor. I watched the old man back closer and closer to where I stood. Then we were facing each other, 3 or 4 feet apart. I had known him all my life, but this was as close as it ever had been to him. His face was the color of dark brown, or worn leather, and looked just as tough. His mustache and beard were the same color as the hair on his head, snow white. He had a large, hawkish nose, thin lips, and the whites of his eyes were yellow. But those same eyes looked tired and weak. He continued to stare at me as if he wanted me to understand what he had done or why he had done it. But at that moment, I couldn't even think. I was barely able to breathe. Still, I couldn't look away. When he saw no answers in my face, he looked again at the deputies and slowly backed out of the courtroom with the big gun still in his hand, pointing at nothing. Thank you.
Thank you for doing that, Mr. Gaines. I'm sure that encourages you to want to know how the rest of it goes. And now to spotlight Lady Hubbard. I'm sure you've read her impressive bio in the program, and it's wonderful that she now lives in New Orleans and teaches at Tulane. The Talented Ripkins is her debut novel, on which she admits she spent 2 years in the writing and 2 years revising. If anyone thought good fiction was not hard work, think again. Lady, please come up. Congratulations on being chosen the winner of the 11th Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. It's a great honor to present you with a sculpture to commemorate the occasion and a cash prize of $10,000.
Thank you. Oh, that's wonderful. Oh. Thank you.
I'll put that here. And now, of course, we would like to have you introduce us to your novel by reading the excerpt that you've chosen.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, and thank you to the judges for selecting my book as the winner. I can't tell you how gratifying it is to have won an award named for Ernest J. Gaines. It really means quite a bit. Well, it means everything to me, really. My book is about an African-American family in Florida, and every member of the family has a unique talent. Like one can see in the dark, one can catch anything that's thrown at her, one can scale any wall. And because they don't always know what to do with their talents, they're often mistaken for idiosyncratic compulsions. So I was going to read a section. The main part of the story is there's a character named Johnny Ripkins who can make perfect maps of any landscape he passes through. And when the novel begins, he's 72 years old, and he owes a debt to a gangster, and he has to raise $100,000. So he's driving around Florida, digging up money that he's buried in holes at various parts, at various points in his life and his past. And his first stop is to the childhood home of his brother, and he realizes he has a niece that he didn't know he had. So the rest of the book is a road trip with the niece and Johnny in the car. And the section I was going to read is when he takes her to visit his cousin Simone. So this is the first time she's meeting any of the other Ripkins with him, so I just wanted to explain that. And then the only other thing I wanted to explain was that at a certain point in his past, he and his cousins had formed a group called the Justice Committee, and they were very committed to doing whatever they could to support the struggle for civil rights. So the Justice Committee gets mentioned in this sample. Okay, the chapter is called Vigilance. An hour later, they entered Sarasota. They got off the interstate and took Cattleman's Road to Tamiami Trail, then kept going until they reached the stone pillars that marked the entrance to Cherokee Estates. They wound down quiet, tree-lined streets for 20 minutes before coming to a stop in front of a large white colonial-style house. On one side was a swimming pool boxed inside a gray screen, and on the other, an enormous flower garden where an old man in green overalls was crouched in front of a yellow azalea bush, coil of water hose slung across his forearm as he tended to Johnny's cousin's twittering blooms. "Is this it?" Johnny smiled. He took one look at his niece's face in the rear view and felt nothing but relief to have finally reached Simone's. Somewhere between East Dunbar and Sarasota, he decided Eloise was going to stay with his cousin until he got his errands finished. After he'd reclaimed the money he'd stashed in Simone's yard, he figured it wouldn't take him more than a day or two to dig up the rest of what he needed. While he was doing that, this is what he wanted Eloise to look at. Not just the people who lived here, but the things they'd gathered around them. Respectability, stability, large homes nestled in nice, clean suburbs. Proof that all things were possible. So when he told Eloise there were many Ribkins living many different lives, she would know he was telling the truth. "Come meet your cousins," Johnny said, and climbed out of the car. He walked up the short brick path to the front door, Eloise trailing so close behind him that he could feel her shivering against the back of his jacket as he reached forward and pressed the bell. A series of chimes rang out, playing the first notes of a lullaby, a sound gradually replaced by the metronomic swish of slippers sliding across a hard floor. A woman's voice called, "Coming," followed by a loud, "Look who it is," shouted through the peephole. Locks were pulled back, the heavy door swung open, and a petite elderly woman appeared before them, dressed in a dark green pantsuit and gold lame slippers. "Johnny Ribkins, is that really you?" His cousin blinked back at him with enormous brown eyes. Simone leaned forward, gripped him to her chest, and then reached for his hand. When she took a step backwards and looked him up and down, he could only imagine her thinking some version of what he did looking at her. "Damn, you got old." Aside from that, she looked pretty much as he remembered. Large head full of thick auburn curls balanced atop a slim bird-like frame. Skin the sun-glint shade of a new copper penny. Face composed of prominent features, long nose, small mouth, jutting chin, that somehow came together to startling effect. He glanced at Eloise and wondered if he should have explained about his cousin beforehand, given the girl a chance to step outside of the effect and thereby something to marvel at. Simone was possessed of a particularly potent power of illusion and could, at will, make people think they were in the presence of the most beautiful woman they'd ever seen. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "Just passing through," Johnny said. "And that so rarely being the case, I just had to stop and say hello." "Passing through? Passing through what?" "Down at my brother's place," Johnny said. "You remember my brother." "Who, Franklin? Look who I got with me." Johnny reached around, gripped Eloise by the shoulder, and pulled her out in front of him. "This is Eloise, Franklin's child. She's spending the summer with me." Simone squinted at the girl and then back at Johnny. After a while, she smiled. "What a nice surprise," she said, and welcomed them both inside. They made their way to the living room, a large, cavernous space illuminated by the light coming through the windows that looked out on Simone's garden. Potted palms had been placed in each corner of the room, their top branches growing wild and curving against the high ceilings, shading a series of small wood-framed portraits mounted to the walls. Nestled inside all the foliage was a beige leather sofa and 2 matching love seats, arranged in a curve to face an enormous flat-screen TV. A teenage boy in a blue polo shirt and khaki pants was sprawled across one of the love seats. At first glance, Johnny mistook him for one of Simone's 2 sons. "That's my grandbaby, Andre. He's staying with me while his father's working out in Los Angeles. Dre, turn that mess off and say hello to your uncle. The boy put the TV on mute and with great effort swiveled around. Hey, he said. Nice to meet you, Eloise chirped back. You two make yourselves at home, Simone said. Johnny looked around the room. The last time he'd come to visit, it hadn't been like this. Simone and her third husband, the judge, had just moved in, so half their belongings were still in boxes. The yard outside a rolling hill of dirt and sand. He remembered staring out the window while Simone described her plans for a glorious flower garden. He'd been in a bad mood at the time, but at some point felt her hand on his shoulder and realized she was telling him that everything would be okay, explaining some theory of why things could only get better in time. So he nodded and tried to smile at her imaginary landscape, when in truth, all he'd seen when he looked out her window was a good place to dig a hole. You want some lemonade? Simone smiled at Eloise. I bet you like lemonade. She spun around and hustled off to the kitchen. Is that Auntie Simone? Eloise was standing in the middle of the room, staring at one of the photos on his cousin's wall. A picture of Simone back in the early 80s, up on a wooden stage, wearing a short red dress and clutching a microphone as she smiled and waved to an unseen crowd. Cousin used to do some acting and modeling and other things. Grandma was hot, Andre said. The picture must have been taken after the Justice Committee disbanded, when she left New York and spent the next few years in LA, determined to put her natural charisma to use in Hollywood. There'd been a few commercials and a couple of low-budget thrillers, one of which had surprised everyone by managing to draw enough of an audience to merit talk of a sequel. Nothing had come of it, but for the next few years, Johnny had jokingly referred to her by her character's name, the Siren, a hard-hearted, gun-toting, Afro-wielding woman tearing her way through the desert on a motorcycle. What's this one? Eloise pointed to a smaller, unframed Polaroid that had been tacked onto the wall next to it. A group of 5 young men and women crowded together on a small floral sofa. It had been taken so long ago that it took Johnny a moment to recognize himself sitting in the center, Simone's arm draped over one of his shoulders. After leaving Lehigh, he'd gone to New York to visit Simone, who was living there at the time. He'd wound up sleeping on that sofa for the next 3 years. That's the group I told you about, the Justice Committee. I put that up there, Andre said. Were you an actor too? Not actors, activists. These were my friends back when I lived in New York. Had a job making maps for black drivers trying to navigate through the South on the interstate roads, telling them where to go if they needed gas or supplies. Things were different back then. The last thing you wanted was to be driving someplace and run out of gas. Just being black, trying to get from one place to another without bothering nobody, seemed like a provocation to a lot of folks, so you had to be careful where you got off. Gas company paid me to make them. They owned the only national chain of service stations catering to black drivers and wanted to be sure everybody knew where to find them. That's how I met Flash. Flash is another member of the Justice Committee. We used to work together. Johnny smiled at the picture. One night after work, we were sitting together when a story came on the news about a man who decided to walk across Florida on the state roads unaccompanied and unarmed. I guess Flash and I thought the same thing, how much we admired that man. Talked to Simone and Bertrand about it, and we all decided to go down there together, see if there was anything we could do to help keep him safe. That's how we got started, and that's pretty much what the Justice Committee was, a group of people trying to do what they could to keep their heroes safe. That's real funny, Uncle Johnny, Eloise said. What? I've never heard anybody say that before, that heroes might be the people who need savings. I don't think most people think about heroes like that. I don't know what most people think. That's how we felt about it. Felt like we needed heroes. We just wanted them to keep going. He looked at the picture, thinking about the maps he'd made for the gas company. He'd had to give up his job in order to take that protest walk through Florida, which was a shame because for a while it felt like he'd finally found an occupation for which his talents were perfectly suited. But he'd also always known that the job couldn't last forever. In their insistence that green was the only color that mattered, the very existence of those maps was mediated by the contradictory demand to render themselves obsolete. He looked at his niece. You know who that man was, don't you? The one we saw on TV that night? The one who had us so inspired? None other than J.D. Thompson. Eloise blinked. J.D. Thompson? You don't know that name? What the heck they teaching you in that school? Maybe we just didn't get to it yet. He was a genuine hero from right there in Lehigh. Turned out one of his brothers was in my class. The kitchen door swung open. Cousin, I could use some help. Get your bony ass in here now. Johnny smiled at his niece, trying to shrug off the salt in his cousin's voice, but Eloise hadn't heard it. She'd gone back to staring at the picture of Simone with the microphone, eyes just as glittery as the dress Simone had been sweating in when the picture was snapped. Why didn't you tell me my aunt was so beautiful? He found Simone leaning against a white marble counter in a bright yellow kitchen, already glaring as he pushed through the door. What? Who is that girl? I told you, Franklin's daughter. Why is this the first I'm hearing it? You never told me Franklin had a child. I didn't know myself until yesterday. Believe me, I was just as surprised as you to realize that woman had the girl with her. Simone frowned. Now you listen here, Johnny Ripkins. This is me, remember? I know you. So you might as well tell the truth. Is that really why you're here? He stared at her. Unlike Meredith, Simone was smart enough to know when he was outright lying, so he reminded himself not to do that. It's absolutely why I'm here now, he said. She wanted to meet family, and I figured, well, you count. Thought I'd let her get to know some real Ripkins. I don't want her getting the wrong ideas about what kind of people we are and how we live out in that swamp. He watched his cousin consider the reasonableness of this explanation. After a while, she sighed. Fine, Johnny, you don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to. I'm happy to see you, whatever the reason. You know I'm always here for you. Johnny nodded. Bullshit, he wanted to say, but didn't. He knew very well if he told her what was in her yard, she'd just claim it for herself. She'd tell herself she was trying to teach him a lesson, when the truth was, if it was in her yard, it was hers. So far as he knew, there wasn't a Ripkins who'd ever been born not knowing instinctively that possession is 9/10 of the law. Actually, Simone, I do have a favor to ask. Anything. Like I said, the girl was a surprise, and don't get me wrong, I'm real happy to meet her. Got some things I want to show her back in St. Augustine. Unfortunately, she kind of caught me in the middle of something. I got some business to take care of before we head back, and I was wondering if it would be all right for her to stay here for a couple days while I'm finishing it up. What kind of business we talking about, Johnny? Just something I got to do? Doesn't mean anything to her except a lot of riding around in the car. I figured she might have more fun with you. Simone pursed her lips and frowned. Look at you, Johnny, still running and scheming at your age. Don't you ever get tired? As happy as I am to see you, I can't imagine it. He opened his mouth to say something, but whatever he wanted to tell her got stuck in his throat. For a moment, it was like she could see right through him to all the things he would not allow himself to say. He was tired. She handed him a glass of lemonade. Of course the girl can stay. That's not even a question. You go on, take care of your business. Well, thanks. You know, part of me always was upset with that girl's father for setting you down the road you're on. Johnny shook his head. Your timeline is off, mistaking cause for effect. Whatever road Johnny wound up in, he'd already been heading towards when his father told him he had a half-brother. Proof of this, he might have told her, was right there in her yard. When he dug that particular hole, he hadn't even met Eloise's father yet. Johnny stayed in the kitchen for a moment, trying to absorb the enormity of his fatigue. All she'd done by pointing it out was make him aware of it. He squinted past the lace curtains on his cousin's window, saw a plastic lounger floating aimlessly in the pool. He reminded himself that whatever else happened, by the end of the week, this would all be over too. When he got back to the living room, Simone was standing in front of the bookcase, sliding out an old leather photo album, while behind her, Andre leaned over the armrest of the love seat and whispered something to Eloise, who blushed. Then the boy looked up, saw Johnny standing there, and had sense enough to turn back around. Johnny narrowed his eyes. There was something about the boy's look that was familiar, yet inspired an immediate distrust. Before he could figure out what it was, Simone grabbed his hand and led him across the room with her leather-bound book. She sat down next to Eloise on the couch. Is this really the first time you're meeting your uncle? That's a shame. Ripkins, you should know, are a close-knit family, generally speaking, a proud and loyal people, going back to the family patriarch, your great-grandfather, the Rib King. She opened the book and pointed to a yellowed newspaper advertisement for Rib King barbecue sauce, featuring an exaggerated cartoon portrait of a smiling black man with a pair of bulbous eyes, a wide nose, and white teeth. There was a crown on his head, but it had been drawn to curve over at the points, making it look like a jester's cap. At the bottom was the caption, "That eats like a king." "Your legacy," Simone said. Johnny winced. It was a caricature so familiar from his childhood that he'd forgotten how obscene it was. Him we don't have any actual pictures of, save what they put on the can. And of course, that don't capture the true essence of the man. He didn't do much smiling in real life. Johnny glanced at Eloise and realized he had no idea what she saw. But part of growing up in that family had been learning to read between the lines, acquiring the ability to squint to see. The Rib King's descendants had inherited no other likeness and so embraced this one as a testament to all he had accomplished in spite of it. People say my father looked just like him. Simone flipped a page and pointed to a picture of Johnny's Uncle Freddie, the eldest of the Rib King's 3 sons, a tall, angular man seated in a high-back velvet chair, looking regal in a gray suit as he stared face forward and pointedly did not smile. His wife, Josephine, in a long white dress, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, stood to the left and slightly behind his chair, while Simone, still just a radiant apple-cheeked baby, grinned contentedly in her daddy's lap. Simone gave Eloise a few moments to absorb the dignity of the man, then flipped the page, stopping when she came to a grainy photo of all 3 of the Rib King's sons as very young men, Uncle Freddie, Uncle Bart, and Johnny's father, Mac. They were standing next to an old car in the yard of a small wooden house. The Rib King doted on his boys, worked day and night to make sure they had everything they'd need in this world. But he also made sure they understood what was required of them, that they would always have to be at least twice as good at whatever they did to get half the credit. The Rib King expected nothing less than excellence from his children, and because of that expectation, one son, my daddy, made it through medical school, became the first black man accepted into the American Medical Association. And your great-uncle Bart became a justice of the peace. Johnny snorted. The part about Uncle Freddie was perfectly true, but Uncle Bart was a gangster. He'd been an ambitious bootlegger by the time that photograph was taken, and thereafter ran an illegal distillery for years. The man's true vocation was making money. The justicing that seemed to go along with it was just a hobby. "What about my grandfather?" Eloise asked. Johnny smiled. "Your grandfather was a painter." "Oh yeah, that's right," Simone said, as if she needed help recalling the fact that had ruled Mac's life. The man had been obsessed with colors no one else could see. That was his talent. Before he moved to St. Augustine and bought his shop, he'd earned his living painting houses in order to afford canvas for all the abstract oils he painted in his free time. Simone flipped the pages again until she came to a photo of the next generation of Ribkins, Simone, Johnny, and Uncle Bart's son Bertrand at ages 10, 15, and 18, standing together on the front steps of a church. "That's me and Johnny and cousin Bertrand. Now, I didn't know your daddy so well, but Johnny and me, we pretty much grew up together." This was simply the truth. Until he and his father moved to St. Augustine when Johnny was 16, his Uncle Freddie had made sure Johnny went to church with him every Sunday. Johnny had been so grateful for an excuse to get out of his father's house that it had taken years for him to understand that this was, in fact, a rebuke. She smiled at the picture. "Remember him like this when he was a little boy? Remember when his father took him to St. Augustine? Remember when he went down to that town where you lived to be a teacher? You should have seen him back then. They didn't call him Johnny the Great for nothing. He was smart, smarter than the rest of us put together, and that's saying a whole lot." Okay, thank you very much. So stop right there.
Lady, thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
if you want to take it now. Sorry, I don't do it without notes. That was fun, and you can see why Lady was chosen by the judges. Finally, the last part of our program, our Student Author Competition Awards. 2 years ago, we began encouraging the next generation of writers. We sponsored a student essay competition in conjunction with the Gaines Award. And this year, more than 150 area students submitted essays on the subject, heroes. The essays were read and judged by Celestin Davis, Helen Jackson, Barbara Sims, and Monica and Henry Bradsher. So we thank them for taking their time and for their good work. Now please welcome Lynn Mitchell, who will introduce and present the Student Essay Awards. Lynn?
Today I got a text that said, "Where are the Hero Awards?" And that was interesting, and I had to think, but the topic this year was heroes, for the students to write 500 words or less and talk about a hero or heroes. And we had some wonderful entries. We had about 200 this year. And we have the best of the best here tonight. And so we will start with the elementary school, and our third place winner is Asharwa Nair, and she is from Wildwood Elementary School. Right, come right here, right, and come stand right here and take it. Congratulations. Okay, and you can walk over here. And her topic was that everyone can be a hero by helping others. Our second place winner for elementary is Trace Ballard, and his heroes are authors. All right, stand right here. Congratulations. Okay, and you can walk over here. And our first place winner for elementary is Michael Foray, and he wrote about Jackie Robinson. Okay, congratulations. That's going this way. All right, and for middle school, we had some interesting topics too. Jaden Wood, oh, I forgot to say those last two elementary winners were from Westdale Heights Academic Magnet School. So for middle school, Jaden Woods wrote about his mother. He's our third place winner, and he's from St. Francis Xavier School. All right. Congratulations. Okay.
Congratulations.
Second place goes to Justin Lodrigus, who's from Glasgow Middle School, and he wrote about his parents and aunt and uncle. Congratulations. There you go. And our first place winner for middle school last year was second place in elementary school winner. So Fuller Stevens is returning this year, and as he said, he's moved up this year. So Fuller. And Fuller is from Sherwood Middle School. Oh, and his hero was that, ordinary people with courage can be heroes. All right, and for high school, Skylar Mancuso won 3rd place. She's from St. Joseph's Academy, and she talked about her mother and her mother helping her see the good in other people. Congratulations. Congratulations. And our high school 2nd place winner is also from St. Joseph's Academy, Ann Wynn, and she talked about her grandmother. Congratulations. Thank you. And our first place winner for high school is Fallon Melton, and she goes to Woodlawn High School. And her entry was about how we can be our own hero when we fight our inner battles. Congratulations. Thank you very much. And congratulations to all of our winners tonight. They are heroes, because when you put yourself out there writing something that a bunch of people are going to read, you have to have courage, and they all do. So congratulations to all.
Thank you, Lynn. And thanks to all the schools and all the students who competed in our essay contest this year. I hope that you've enjoyed the evening and that you're glad that you battled the cold to come down. I don't know about you, but I'm certainly inspired by the examples of excellent writing from the Venerable Ernest Gaines and from Lady Hubbard, who obviously has a brilliant future, and also by the promise of our student writers. Lady has agreed to sign books in the lobby, so Cottonwood Books has very kindly set up a table with her books available for purchase. And of course, we hope that you'll join us in the Hartley Bay Theater for our reception, which will honor Ernest Gaines, Lady Hubbard, and the tradition of literary excellence. Again, thanks so much for coming. Good night.